a group of 20 Democrats in the House of Representatives have written a letter to the White House demanding that this Trump administration disclose that Israel maintains a nuclear arsenal. And this is a huge deal.
So Nick Fuentes just exposed the most embarrassing truth in American politics. Democrats are acting more America first than Republicans on Israel. 20 House Democrats are demanding Trump acknowledge Israel's secret nuclear arsenal, something that's been classified for 60 years to protect Israeli interests, not American ones. This is massive.
For those that don't know, Israel is a nuclear-armed country. I think everybody knows this at this point. There's only about a dozen nuclear-armed countries in the world, and you probably know them. It's the US, Russia, China, France, the United Kingdom, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. But the difference is, unlike all these other countries, every other country in the world discloses and acknowledges that they have nuclear weapons. We know that France has nuclear weapons because they have declared them. We know that Russia has nuclear weapons because they have declared them. And so everybody knows what everybody has. The one country that this does not apply to is Israel. Israel has, since the mid-1960s, okay, so for 60 years, Israel has maintained a clandestine, undeclared nuclear arsenal. We don't know the exact size, but it's estimated to be anywhere between 200 and 300 nuclear bombs, nuclear warheads. And they have two methods of delivery. They have missiles, they're Jericho missiles, and they have submarines. There's speculation that they have submarine-launched ballistic missiles that can carry a nuclear warhead. So people talk about the means of delivery. Israel's got 2 out of the 3 in the nuclear triad, the other being a strategic air force. Israel does not have that. So it is known, by the way, in the international community, and it is established and it's known among the public that Israel has nuclear weapons. But it has never been officially disclosed by Israel, and maybe more concerning, the United States has never acknowledged that Israel has a nuclear weapons program. And this has been a matter of policy since the Nixon administration. President Nixon and Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir came to a secret agreement in the late 1960s that the United States would effectively participate in Israel's strategic ambiguity, meaning Israel would never declare its nuclear weapons program, and we would never snitch. We would never acknowledge that they have nuclear weapons, even though everybody knows that they do, and we know that they do. We won't talk about it. And why is that the case? Well, Israel does not want to declare their nuclear arsenal because they want something called strategic ambiguity. They want their neighbors and their rivals in the Middle East not to know whether they have nuclear weapons or how many nuclear weapons they have or where they are or how they can deliver them. And why would that be beneficial for Israel to maintain this ambiguity? So that all these other countries would be a little bit more careful. A nuclear country realistically cannot lose a war.
The Nixon-Meir Agreement from 1969 is documented in declassified State Department cables. America became Israel's nuclear enabler, helping them circumvent the Non-Proliferation Treaty while we enforce it on everyone else. This dual standard has compromised our diplomatic credibility for decades. We can't negotiate honestly when we're hiding our allies' arsenal.
And it doesn't mean that they literally can't lose. It means you don't want them to lose a war. Because if a nuclear country loses a war or is at risk of losing a total war against a non-nuclear country, well, the nuclear country will use its nukes. So let's say, for example, that Syria and Egypt invade Israel, and Israel fears that it might lose the war and become occupied and maybe erased from the map. Well, then Israel will use their weapon of last resort and they will just nuke Egypt and Syria. And that came very close to happening in the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Syria and Egypt simultaneously invaded Israel. Israel was caught completely by surprise. They were late in mobilizing their reserve ground forces, and it looked like maybe Israel might fall. Israel was begging the United States for support. We were dragging our feet. And so what did their prime minister do, Golda Meir? she exposed their nuclear weapons in full view of our satellites for us to see. And the implication was that if we didn't airlift supplies to Israel, that they would use their nuclear weapons against Egypt and Syria, which we definitely did not want to happen. So then we launched the biggest airlift of weapons and supplies to Israel since World War II, or maybe in history. I don't know exactly the numbers. But that is part of their ambiguity. They don't want other countries to know what they're capable of so that they're not going to push Israel too far. They might not want to win so decisively. They might not want to threaten Israel too much. It is to create uncertainty so that in order not to risk miscalculation, their rivals will be less aggressive. Let's say in a modern context, if Saddam Hussein does not know where Israel's red line is, when they're going to use their nuclear weapons, Iraq has to do some guesswork. Where is that red line? Is it here? Is it there? And obviously, if you don't want to get nuked, you're going to be pretty conservative in your calculations. If you're guessing where that red line is, you don't want to say it's too far when actually it's closer because you don't want to trip it. You don't want to cross the threshold. So that means that Iraq or Iran or any other adversary, they're going to be a little bit less aggressive to prevent a miscalculation that results in them being hit with a nuclear strike. So this is the thinking here. And the United States will not acknowledge their nuclear program because we're helping them. We are, in a sense, helping them maintain this deception. We're helping them maintain this ambiguity for their benefit. And it's not really for our benefit. It's actually better for the United States that every party in the conflict knows where the red lines are. It's also actually better for every party, including the United States, to know what Israel has in the context of a nuclear negotiation. So let's talk about, for example, the negotiation over Iran's nuclear arsenal. Why does Iran seek a nuclear hedge? Why do they want centrifuges? Why do they engage in nuclear enrichment? Why are they enriching uranium to weapons grade? It's because they fear that Israel and the United States will attack them. Israel and the United States are nuclear powers. So in order for Iran to deter an attack from nuclear armed powers, they have to achieve parity. They have to get on our level and have the same strategic capability, which is a nuclear arsenal. Or at the minimum, 80% of the way towards a nuclear arsenal so they could quickly build one. So you could say, in a way, that the only reason Iran wants a nuclear weapon in any scenario is because Israel already has one. And that actually would be good for everybody to know. How can we convince Iran that they cannot have a nuclear weapon? You have no right to enrichment. You have no right to nuclear, highly enriched uranium. You have no right even to a nuclear weapon, but Israel does. Israel does, but we won't acknowledge it. We're going to be complicit in their illegal, undeclared nuclear weapons program, but you can't have anything. You can have a peaceful nuclear program. You can have enrichment at any level. You can't have a centrifuge. You can't have weapons. Forget even about that. It's just not even honest. So it impedes the ability of countries in the Middle East to calculate effectively, and it also is hindering diplomacy.
Operation Nickelgrass in 1973 was literal nuclear blackmail. Golda Meir exposed their weapons to our satellites and threatened to nuke Egypt and Syria unless we airlifted supplies. We gave them the largest weapons transfer since World War II because they held nuclear escalation over our heads. That's not an alliance, that's extortion.
So to this end, a group of 20 Democrats have written a letter to the White House, and they have said, for these reasons, this policy needs to end. This is not America first. This is helping Israel at our expense. This is helping Israel at the expense of actually every country in the Middle East. We're not being honest with Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Iran. Therefore, it's hindering diplomacy. It's also increasing the risk of some miscalculation that could result in a nuclear war that gets Americans killed. So the Democrats are demanding that the White House change this policy of ambiguity and acknowledge Israel has nukes. And this is a story from the Washington Post, or pardon me, I think this is from another source quoting the Post. It says, a group of House Democrats is urging the Trump administration to publicly acknowledge Israel's undeclared nuclear weapons program. In a letter to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, more than 24 lawmakers led by Representative Joaquin Castro say that Washington's silence on the program is indefensible amid the war in Iran and the acute threat of military escalation. The lawmakers wrote, quote, the risks of the risks of miscalculation, escalation, and nuclear use in this environment are not theoretical. Congress has a constitutional responsibility to be fully informed about the nuclear balance in the Middle East, the risk of escalation by any party to the conflict, and the administration's planning and contingencies for such scenarios. Israel does not acknowledge its nuclear weapons program built in secret beginning in the late 1950s and has no publicly stated doctrine on how it might use those weapons. Castro, in an interview with the Post, said the United States should not refuse to disclose this information about a foreign nation simply out of courtesy when there is so much at stake for our own service members, our economy, and the country. He said U.S. officials speak candidly about the nuclear weapons programs of the United Kingdom, France, India, Pakistan, Russia, North Korea, and China, and Israel should be no different. Last month, a record 40 Senate Democrats voted to block weapons transfers to Israel. According to Pew Research Center, 80% of Democrats now view Israel unfavorably, up from 53% in 2022. Think of that. 80% of Democrats view Israel unfavorably. They shut down weapons transfers to Israel. They vote against foreign aid to Israel. They want to block technology sharing with Israel. And now they want us to disclose Israel's nuclear weapons program. Shapiro says many, perhaps most Democrats, this is an analyst, at this point want to see fundamental changes in the U.S.-Israeli relationship. The first change that these Democrats want to see is for the U.S. to hold Israel to the same standards as other countries on issues such as nuclear weapons. Now, once again, you hate to say it, but this is the America First policy, and it's coming from the Democrats.
Democratic opinion shifted 27 points against Israel in just 2 years. That's seismic. Meanwhile, Republican leadership keeps elevating Israel firsters like Mike Waltz, who was literally using encrypted apps to coordinate with Netanyahu. Democrats voted to block weapons transfers, while Republicans handed over classified intelligence. The base sees it.
And by the way, this is the key that unlocks the entire dilemma in the Middle East. What exactly is the root of this current conflict? All of the current conflicts in Lebanon, in Gaza, in Yemen, in Iran. The root of this conflict really is Israel's undeclared nuclear arsenal. Israel has a stockpile of nuclear weapons that they will not acknowledge exists. At the same time, Israel is prosecuting a proxy war against Iran and all of its allies, against Hezbollah, against the Assad regime at one time, against Hamas, against the Houthis, and against Iran. Israel is in Iran doing cyber attacks, industrial sabotage, high-level assassinations. And as of last year, with the United States carrying out an all-out air campaign, a naval campaign. And Iran has no means or ability to defend itself. Why? Because Iran does not have a nuclear capability and Israel does. And that's really the root of the problem. Iran understands that Israel wants regime change in Iran. Israel ultimately seeks to totally dominate the Middle East. And so that means that every country is going to be subordinated to Israel or will be destroyed. And Iran is a big nation. 90 million people, huge territory, huge middle class, huge economy supported by natural energy resources. And so Iran is a natural rival of Israel, is never going to submit to Israel. And so Israel has to destroy Iran. And Israel is perfectly capable of doing this because Israel has weapons of mass destruction and Iran doesn't. So this is why Iran is in this push to maintain some kind of nuclear hedge. This is at the center of this three-way problem between Israel, Iran, and the United States. Israel pursues regime change against Iran. So Iran is in a race to a nuclear hedge. That race towards a nuclear hedge triggers a non-proliferation impulse from the United States. We cannot allow other countries to get nuclear weapons because there tends to be a domino effect. Israel gets nukes, so all their neighbors want them. Syria wants them. Iraq wants them. Libya wants them. So we have to destroy all those countries. Iran wants them. What happens if Iran gets a nuclear weapon? Well, then Saudi Arabia is going to want a nuclear weapon because they're in a proxy war with Iran. And then the Emirates is going to want a nuclear weapon. And what happens then when there's 4 nuclear countries in the Middle East? Then you got Israel, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and then other countries are going to want nuclear weapons. Maybe Turkey will want nuclear weapons. Maybe then Ethiopia, Egypt will want nuclear weapons. This is how this goes out of control. And the more nations have nuclear weapons, one, we are at a disadvantage then strategically against every other country that has them. But also, there's a greater risk of nuclear terrorism. There's a greater risk of nuclear war. And so that triggers our grand strategy, our geopolitical imperative, which is to suppress the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. You see? So Israel wants regime change in Iran. So Iran needs a nuclear hedge. Because they're pursuing a nuclear hedge, now we have to intervene to prevent them from getting one. And what does that look like? Well, that is the current diplomacy with Iran. In this conversation between Washington and Tehran, we are telling them, why are we at war with you? Because you cannot have centrifuges. Because centrifuges enrich uranium, and if you're able to enrich uranium, then you can create weapons-grade uranium that can be used as fuel for a nuclear bomb. So that's why you can't have any kind of nuclear program. You can't have any enrichment, any centrifuges. You have to destroy what you have under our supervision. You have to surrender your stockpile of already highly enriched uranium. And that is something that Iran will never do. That is something they will never give up, because the second that they give up their nuclear hedge, they are completely vulnerable to regime change from Israel. And we cannot accept anything less than those things, because as long as Iran has enrichment and as long as Israel is seeking regime change, then on a long enough timeline, Iran is going to acquire a nuclear bomb. And that is something we can never allow, because then again, it triggers this arms race. And then you've got an arms race in the Persian Gulf, and the UAE is next, and Saudi Arabia after that. They're going to get their blueprints from Pakistan. And now the whole Middle East is nuclear armed. This is where we are. So people say, what do we do about Iran? How do we extricate ourselves from the war? Well, Iran is telling us they will not accept a short-term truce. Why is that? Because they know that if we end the war with Iran today, all we are going to do, the United States and Israel, is we're going to build more weapons to attack them. All we're going to do is stabilize the economy. We're going to get gas prices back down. We're going to get through the midterms. We're going to build more missile interceptors. We're going to repair our bases. We're going to repair our carriers. We're going to replenish our armed forces that are deployed there. And then we're going to take another crack at it and invade again, or attack again, which might include an invasion. And Iran is telling us we are not going to let you off the hook unless we get an agreement on the root causes of the conflict. We don't ever want to fight you again. And what that means from Iran's perspective is an acknowledgement that they can enrich uranium, that they can have centrifuges. In other words, that they can have their nuclear hedge. And why do they need that nuclear hedge? Because they don't trust us because they know that we can never restrain Israel, which is a nuclear armed power. Iran doesn't know that Israel will never nuke them. Iran doesn't know that Israel will never try regime change, and they will be insulated from any kind of retaliation because they have a nuclear arsenal, which is always their plan B. So how do we get out of our war with Iran? Well, the only way that we can deal honestly and honorably with Iran, how do you get them to give up their right to enrich, their right to have a nuclear program, if we are complicit in Israel's illegal, undeclared nuclear program? We can't. They're never going to trust us. They're never going to deal with us in good faith, and they're never going to build enough rapport that they'll ever agree to concessions that are acceptable to us. So what must be involved in the process is that we actually have to treat Israel and Iran somewhat equally and fairly. We have to restrain Israel. If regime change from Israel is what Iran fears, if a nuclear-armed Israel attacking Iran is what Iran fears, then we have to put Israel in their place. You have to start by acknowledging, yeah, they're a nuclear-armed power. It really isn't fair. How can we expect Iran to give up their enrichment? They don't even have bombs. They don't even have a bomb yet. They don't even have a method of delivery. Iran is not able to miniaturize a nuclear warhead and put it on a ballistic missile. They don't even have a method of delivery yet. They don't have a strategic air force. They don't have submarines that can launch a submarine launch ballistic missile. They don't have miniaturization. Israel has 300 warheads on missiles, on submarines ready to go. How can we tell Iran, you can't even have the centrifuges that make the enriched uranium that go into a bomb? They don't even have delivery yet, when we are lying about Israel's undeclared program. You can't. So it starts with some honesty where you say, yes, Israel is a nuclear-armed country. They have 300 nuclear warheads pointed at Iran. That is how they're able to engage in all these risky foreign policy decisions that they've been doing for the past 10 years or 20 years. And maybe there needs to be some kind of a reckoning about that. Maybe an agreement from Iran to give up their centrifuges involves restrictions on Israel's nuclear program. Maybe let's start with disclosure. Maybe let's start with some kind of nuclear doctrine. We don't even know how Israel would use their nuclear weapons. Do they have any articulable doctrine on under what conditions or circumstances they would consider using weapons of mass destruction? Because we do. Russia does. We promulgate a strategic doctrine that says only under these circumstances will we use nuclear weapons. And this is meant to reassure other countries with these world-ending weapons. Israel, nobody knows what they have, how many they have, that they have them, and maybe more importantly, we don't even know under what conditions they would use them and how they would use them and against whom. Would they just use them against Iran, or would they use them against the whole world? Would they use them against every nuclear power? We don't know. And under what circumstances? We don't know. That might be a step in the right direction. If we can impose limitations or transparency on Israel's program, maybe then Iran would come to the table. And at the minimum, forget even about that, I think that would make everybody feel a lot safer. When Israel is bombing Iran and assassinating all their leadership, and when Israel is bombing their civilian infrastructure, and when we're bombing their military and we're bombing everything, and Iran is launching missiles at Israel's nuclear facilities, and launching missiles at Israel's population centers, it would actually be better for America and American soldiers and everybody else in the region to know at what point do those attacks trigger a nuclear response. That would be better for us to know, because that would make us safer. And that would make us better able to manage the situation and prevent it from escalating to a point where it becomes a nuclear confrontation. That would be safer for the United States, safer for the soldiers in the Middle East, safer for our other allies in the region, because we do have other allies, safer for Europe. And where is this policy coming from? It's coming from the Democrats. Could you even imagine Republicans sending a letter like this? Of course not. Who are the Republicans? Randy Fine, Lindsey Graham, Mark Levin, Laura Loomer, Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth, Mike Waltz is our UN ambassador. Would this ever come from the Republicans? It's time to acknowledge that from a national security point of view, the Democrats are at this point in time more America first than the Republicans. And that's a tough pill to swallow, but it's true. The Republicans have let government officials into the White House who are compromising vital U.S. intelligence and interests with Israel. Our national security advisor, Mike Waltz from Florida, who was chosen by Susie Wiles, he was using an encrypted messaging app to talk to the Prime Minister of Israel. That guy should be in jail. That guy should be under the jail. They didn't even get rid of him. They took him out of that position and they gave him a new job as the UN ambassador. How is that America first? You're literally compromising national security at the highest levels. Mike Waltz was in constant communication with Netanyahu, lobbying on behalf of Israel as the national security advisor to the White House, to the President of the United States. And they didn't even fire him. Dan Bongino, his phone was on Israel time, and he was the deputy director of the FBI. This is who is in our government under the Trump administration. Who are the Republican leadership in Congress? From our side, well, it's Lindsey Graham. It's Randy Fine. It's these kinds of Republicans. Whereas on the Democrat side, throughout Biden's term, you had Democrats that were trying to get a memorandum passed that we wouldn't give Israel 2,000-pound bombs, that we would review whether they were using the weapons we give them in accordance with the laws of war so that we could stop sending them every class of weapons that they're asking for. And there was enormous pressure inside the Biden administration to shut down their war in Gaza. We confronted Iran but never attacked them under Biden. We tried to negotiate a deal with Iran. And now there's 20 Democrats that want disclosure on Israel's nuclear arsenal. When will people acknowledge, let's just say it, the Democrats are more America first on foreign policy than the Republicans right now, bar for bar.